Thank you, Acting Speaker. Speaker, I rise to talk today about the Wage Theft Amendment Bill 2025. At its heart, this bill repeals Victoria's criminal wage theft offences, renames the Wage Inspectorate Victoria as the Workforce Inspectorate Victoria, and confers on that body a new complaints referral function, particularly in relation to public construction worksites. The Coalition's position is clear. Wage theft is wrong. It robs workers of their lawful entitlements and undermines honest businesses. But in a federation, the law must be coherent and avoid duplication. The Commonwealth's wage theft offences, which came into force on the 1st of January this year, now cover the field. In that context, repealing Victoria's overlapping criminal offences does indeed make sense. We will not oppose this bill for that reason, but we will not give the Allan Labor government a free pass. Because while this bill contains some sensible housekeeping, it also represents another missed opportunity, another Labor half measure on integrity in public construction and on tackling the culture of lawlessness, intimidation and waste that has flourished under this government's watch. The Commonwealth's Fair Work Legislation Amendment, Closing the Loopholes No. 2 Act of 2024, passed by the Albanese government in December last year, made it a criminal offence to intentionally underpay wages anywhere in Australia. The laws, as I mentioned, commenced on the 1st of January 2025. These new national provisions were specifically drafted to occupy the field in relation to criminal underpayment. That means the Victorian offences in the Wage Theft Act 2020 have become redundant and in some respects inoperable. We oppose the original 2020 Victorian legislation not because we condone underpayment, but because this government rammed it through during the depths of the COVID-19 shutdowns when businesses, particularly small businesses, were struggling to survive, and because the Act created an inconsistent layer of criminalisation on top of existing federal provisions. Now that the national regime exists, the overlap is unnecessary. On this narrow point, Labor has finally, albeit belatedly, done the right thing. However, the most significant new element in this bill is not about wage theft at all. It is about the Wilson Review. Last year, the media blew the lid off what many of us on this side have been warning about for years: entrenched misconduct, criminal infiltration and brazen intimidation by the CFMEU on Victorian government worksites, as the member for Murray Plains talked about before. We saw credible allegations of union officials with links to organised crime, of threats and coercion used to control who could work on certain sites, of bid rigging and anti-competitive behaviour driving up costs for taxpayers. These were not just isolated incidents. In fact, they were part of a pattern that had been allowed to fester under former Premier Daniel Andrews and now the current Premier. The CFMEU is not some peripheral player in Victoria's construction industry. They are embedded in Labor's big build projects. They bankroll campaigns and they wield much influence inside the Labor Party itself. Indeed, it took the Commonwealth Government, not the Premier, to finally place the CFMEU into administration last year, a damning indictment on this government. Faced with this public exposure, the Premier announced on the 15th of July 2024 that she would commission an independent review into Victorian government bodies' engagement with construction companies and unions. Just 5 days later, Greg Wilson was appointed to lead it. Now, Mr Wilson has produced a report with 8 recommendations. Recommendations aimed at strengthening oversight, tightening procurement, improving information sharing between agencies, and ensuring allegations of unlawful conduct were dealt with promptly and effectively. These recommendations were not radical. They were practical steps to protect public money and public safety. Yet what has this Allan Labor government done? Out of those 8 recommendations, this bill implements just one. Recommendation 1, establishing a central complaints referral function within the newly renamed Workforce Inspectorate Victoria. It also supports the implementation of Recommendation 7, giving the Inspectorate the ability to receive reports from any person, including principal contractors. And that's it, 2 out of 8, Acting Speaker. The rest, we are told they are being worked on and will be the subject of further legislation later this year. Victorians have heard this before. Promises of future reform under this government have had a habit of disappearing into the long grass. Meanwhile, the same toxic culture Mr Wilson identified the intimidation of contractors, the price gouging, the featherbedding, the billion-dollar blowouts continues unchecked or largely unchecked on work sites across the state. This is not a whole-of-government response. This is not the decisive clean-up jobs Victorians were promised and would expect. It is the legislative equivalent of sweeping a scandal under the rug while hoping the public moves on. And even the one recommendation Labor is implementing is being done in the most limited way possible. This new complaints function will not have investigative powers. It cannot compel agencies to act on referrals. It cannot force outcomes. It will be a clearinghouse, a post box, passing complaints along to the same agencies that have already failed to get a grip on CFMEU lawlessness in the past. That is why the Liberals and Nationalists have called and will continue to call for a Royal Commission into misconduct on state government construction projects, a body with full coercive powers, the ability to compel witnesses, the independence to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and the transparency of public hearings. Because until that happens, the Wilson Review will be just another Labor talking point, a political prop used to pretend action is being taken, while the rorts, the intimidation and the waste carry on, business as usual, on big build sites across Victoria. On the topic of wage theft as well, I also wanted to mention modern slavery while I'm at it. Wage theft, of course, is along the spectrum from good work at one end through to modern slavery at the other end, where people cannot walk free from that situation. While Labor appears or is given the impression that they want to tackle wage theft in Victoria, they don't seem to be taking sufficient action, though, on modern slavery within supply chains, whether it comes to renewable energy with solar panels, on train roll-in stock or tram roll-in stock, on electric buses and much more. And I've continued to call upon this Labor government to voluntarily report under Australia's Modern Slavery Act, which they could actually do at any time, much as big businesses and others do in terms of reporting under this Act. When I chaired the federal parliamentary inquiry into modern slavery, our committee produced the landmark Hidden in Plain Sight report in 2017. That report led directly to the Modern Slavery Act 2018, introduced by the former federal coalition government. And it didn't just call for transparency, it called for teeth, an independent anti-slavery commissioner, penalties for non-compliance, a public repository of reports, and coverage of government procurement. And government procurement at the federal level is of course covered now, but it doesn't cover constitutionally Victorian government procurement, which could though be done, as I mentioned, through voluntary reporting. That work though taught me a simple truth. When exploitation exists in supply chains, whether in garment factories overseas or labour hire firms here in Victoria or elsewhere, good intentions are not enough. You need real enforcement, full transparency, and a government prepared to hold itself to the same standard it demands of business. In fact, in this very parliament, as I mentioned, I have called on the Allen government many times to voluntarily report on modern slavery risks in its own procurement and supply chains, even though it is not required under the Federal Act. Public money must never fuel exploitation, and the state must lead by example. Labor's approach to the Wilson Review, in comparison as well, fails this basic test. Just as our modern slavery inquiry demanded robust supply chain accountability, the Wilson Review calls for decisive action in construction procurement. Instead, Labor has cherry-picked, watered down and delayed in this regard. So let's be clear about what this bill does. It repeals the Victorian wage theft offences. It renames the Wage Inspectorate Victoria as the Workforce Inspectorate Victoria. It creates a central complaints referral function for matters related to public constructions. But it will not give the Inspectorate investigative powers over these complaints, require agencies to act on referrals, address the remaining 6 Wilson Review recommendations, which should be acted upon as soon as possible, establish the kind of independent coercive inquiry that is clearly needed to clean up the sector, and more. Labor says it will evaluate the impact of these changes 2 years after commencement. 2 years. Given the scale of the misconduct and the billions at stake, that timeline is woefully inadequate. So, lastly, I note that the Liberals will not oppose this bill in the Legislative Assembly. We accept that repealing redundant state wage theft offences is sensible in light of the national law, and we support any measure, however modest, that improves complaints handling in the public construction. That said, this is not enough, as I mentioned, and this Labor government must do more on this issue.